start recording this session now, just because it's 8:30. I see William is now on. See, Hank is signing in, and Greg Bell, Banu.
That's interesting, Cliff. The minute you started recording, I was able to see it. That's odd.
All right.
It's just Amazon Workspace right now, right?
Yes.
Yep. That's weird. God. I think Microsoft Link has a mind of its own.
Well, even though it's been around for a few years, I think the meeting technology is still fairly new to it. So they may still have a few bugs. All right, it's 8:31 now. Let's say we get this show on the road. Okay, I'll start off again just saying good morning to everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your morning to come watch a little presentation. There are no guarantees everything's going to work perfectly. We are still going through testing our scripts and debugging, find little issues every now and then, but we'll do our best to make a good presentation for you. The very first thing I'm going to do is actually stop my video presentation and pass it over to Forrest for him to show you setting up CloudFormation. So let's see if I can figure out how to stop my sharing again. Let's see. Well, I did it earlier, but oh, that's right. You got to click over here on this. And you click on your monitor, and then nope.
Is there a stop presenting near the top of your screen, slightly to the right of center?
Yes, there is. Thank you.
There's also a give control, but that's not what you want. Yeah,
well, I do want to give control now.
You want to make presenter, right? Forrest, can you share your screen now?
Not yet. Still waiting for the thing to come through.
Wonder whenever I right click on somebody it says make an attendee. I wonder what that means.
Okay, so you should see my desktop now.
It's loading.
It's loading.
There it is.
Okay, so you should see that I'm on the Amazon Web Services console homepage here. And if you have been in Amazon at all, you know that most of what we're doing in this EC2 space. That's where we can look at our instances and other things. I'm actually going to go somewhere else. I'm going to go down here under Deployment and Management, and I'm going to pull up CloudFormation. And what you'll see here is a bunch of stacks. And what these are, each one of these stacks is basically a collection of AWS resources. And pretty much anything in AWS, as I understand it, can be a resource. So that could be an instance, it could be a security group, it could be any number of things. And in our case, when we want to put up a new set of instances, we're going to put up a new set of stacks, and that will take care of configuring all of the associated resources that will go with that instance, and it'll stand up the instance as well. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, you can see that I've created various stacks here in the past few days. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one and show you how this works. Again, this is the process of bringing up an initial instance in AWS. So I'm going to name this one. We will just call it.
Quick question for us.
Yes, sir.
I'm seeing the top left corner of your Safari screen right now. Is that coming through? Is everybody seeing the rest of the desktop as well? Am I the only one that gets the top left?
No, well, it's just the top left.
That's what I thought too.
That's all I'm seeing too.
Okay. I'm not sure what to fix on my end. I actually can't see what I'm presenting. It just says you're presenting.
Even when I enlarge it. Forrest, you see up at the top where it says Microsoft and then link?
Yes.
It cuts off right after the Y and goes down, and you see the word stop. And then I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little small icons, and then just Clifton, yourself, and Margaret.
So try stop sharing and reshare and see if that does.
Okay, I'm going to stop presenting. We're going to retry.
Yeah, we're all getting used to this link meeting, so just bear with us.
Oh, yeah.
Let me know if that's any better.
It's loading.
Same thing here. Let me.
Can you shrink up your Safari window to the top left corner?
Yeah, I'm getting the same thing too.
Okay, I'm going to make my Safari browser smaller. Tell me if it looks any different.
It's scooting over.
That's better.
Okay. Oh, go a little smaller, just a little bit.
Okay. I wonder if this is a problem with presenting from a Mac. I don't know.
Yeah, we can almost see the whole browser.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, give that a try.
All right, so I'm going to go back to my CloudFormation stack, and do you see that says select template there?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So we'll just call this, what is today, the 10th, July 10th?
Yes.
Demo. And what you have the option here to do is to select a sample template or to upload a template. And what this is just a piece of JSON that specifies some parameters that are going to auto-load so you don't have to type everything in by hand. And I'm going to upload my newest file here. If I can find where it is.
On your desktop, I think.
Yes, it is.
Your documents there.
Yep. And can you? I wanted to show you this. Can you guys see this JSON file that I have open here?
I can see down to line 22.
Okay. All right. So this is just a bunch of little chunks of JSON, and you'll see that it specifies things like the DNS name and the domain and user of the instance that we want to add. It specifies the DNS servers, various security groups, the VPC we want to put it in, the availability zone. So these are all just parameters that we don't want to have to specify by hand. And then also the size of these backup volumes that we're going to attach, as well as the AMI of the gold image that we're going to use to build the instance from. So let me go back to AWS, and I'm going to click Next here. Okay, and you'll see that this is going to bring up a window with most of these parameters auto-filled from the JSON that I just specified. And you'll see that the availability zone here is something that might need to change. If we're building a 3-node cluster, we're going to have 3 AZs, so each node is going to be in its own AZ. I'm going to leave that the way it is for right now. We've got our 3 different volume sizes here. That's our diff, our full, and somewhere there's a log. And the service name in this case is going to be db:/MS SQL. The AMI happens to be that. That's just the ID that's associated with the Windows 2012 image that we have stored in Amazon. This we're going to call July 10th demo. And then the subnet is going to be an ID that's associated with your availability zone. This is something that's already been set up by, I'm assuming, Mike or possibly Randy. So I'm going to leave that the way it is. And then the VPC, this is just our test VPC. That's where I'm going to put the instance. Any questions about this before I go on? Okay. So the next screen here has the option to specify some tags. We have a tag policy that specifies what tags we can add to an instance or to a stack. So I'm not going to add any right now. There's a couple that were added by default in the CloudFormation script that I uploaded. One is a name tag. One I think tells when it expires. And then I just have a little screen here that lets me review what I put in. You'll see this user here, by the way, is a test user that's set up in our domain that should have rights to join the computer to the domain. So there's a couple of PowerShell scripts baked into that CloudFormation that will run when the instance spins up for the first time, and that will take care of renaming the computer and putting it on the domain there in our test VPC. So no tags provided. And you notice it says rollback on failure, so if for some reason the stack doesn't create correctly, it should clean itself up. And I'm going to click Create. And we're back at the stack window that I tried to show before. I don't know how much of it came through. But there's a bunch of these. It says Create in Progress. And that stack should be up in, this should say Create Complete in probably 2 minutes at most. However, just because the stack is complete doesn't mean that the instance has created. The instance is just one resource that's going to be spun up from the stack. So what we really want to do now at this point is to go back to our regular EC2 dashboard and look at our instances. And if I search for July 10th demo, and let's see, it hasn't found anything yet, so that means the stack hasn't come up yet. But we're just going to wait until we see that. That should be about... And there it is. You'll see that it just popped up there. It's got a little spinning wheel. And it says the instance state says pending here, and the status checks are initializing. And at this point, we won't follow this any farther, but this is going to take probably about 30 minutes to really fully get up to the point where you can access it, just because it's going to have to spin itself up, and it's going to have to do a couple of restarts to join itself to the domain and do some other things. There's some storage scripts eventually that will run on this box to map the backup drives, the ephemeral storage correctly. So the idea would be, even once the instance comes up and says running here, you see the little green dot there. You'll want to wait until your status checks say passed. It should say 2 out of 2, and there will be a little green check mark. And then at that point, it's probably safe to try logging into your instance. And you should be able to do that if you have credentials in the admin domain, or the admin VPC. And that's really all there is to it, to bringing up a basic CloudFormation instance. Again, if we were bringing up a 3-node cluster, we would do that 3 times. We would put them in separate AZs with separate subnet IDs, and then we would go through the process that Cliff is going to show you of configuring SQL on the boxes, joining them to a cluster, and creating the availability group. Cliff?
All right. So go ahead and do your stop sharing on yours, and I'll see if I can share.
Let's see if I can make this work. Do I need to make you presenter again?
Not sure. Okay, so now it tells me feel free to start presenting. I will share my secondary monitor, which has my AWS workspace. Looks like it's loading, and it's there now. Can y'all see my screen at this point?
Yes.
Okay. All right, on my Amazon workspace, right now I have 3 shortcuts for RDP sessions for 3 new servers that Forrest created late yesterday afternoon. These are what I call virgin servers. They haven't really been messed with yet, so they are good to go. I'm going to jump into the first one, pre-gold 01. We got 01, 02, 03. And these 3 servers are in 3 different availability zones in Amazon. All right. Okay. And this is what we get for a brand new instance of a server. The very first thing I like to do is to tweak it just a little bit for my personal likings, and this is something everybody might want to do. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Server 2012, the interface is a little bit different. There's no start menu down here, although 2012 R2 does have a little start button. On this version, you go to the bottom right corner and you just kind of hover just next to the time, and you'll see a little menu pop up on the right. When you do that, then you'll go up here and click on the start button. Okay, this is the default start menu for Server 2012. First thing I want to do is, if I just start typing things like SQL, it automatically starts doing an application search. Okay, so I see that there's my SQL Management Console. You right click on it and go down to the bottom, and you tell it to pin to taskbar, and that'll put a shortcut down there for you. I'm going to do the same thing for the SQL Configuration Manager. Right click and pin it to the taskbar. Okay. Now to change my search, I'm just going to hit the backspace, and I'm backspacing over the SQL. I want to look up my failover cluster manager. I just type in the word fail, and there it is. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to pin that to my taskbar. Okay, I'm going to backspace some more. I want to add, let's see, I want to do my PowerShell. So I'm just going to do POW, P-O-W, and I work in the ISE, the Integrated Service Environment, so I will right-click on that and pin it to my taskbar. There's a few other things I like to keep handy to me, such as the Run button. Okay, so I'm going to pin it down, and the command window. I like to have it available. Okay, I think that should be enough. So from get back to where you want, you just click on the desktop, and here you are. Now here's all my shortcuts at the bottom. Just to show you, this is a pristine install. Our gold image has SQL Server pre-installed as a default install on the C drive. It's running under the local service, so nothing's been configured yet on that. Okay. Oh, on PowerShell, this is our PowerShell ISE. If we look to the left, here's another PowerShell shortcut. That just brings up the command line window. So if I click on that, that's all you have. And notice it says, well, that one does show administrator. That one did start up as administrator. What I like to do is right-click on the ISE, right-click on that, and then go to the properties. The properties of this shortcut has an advanced feature that says you can tell it to always run as administrator. The reason you need to tell PowerShell to run as administrator is because it has a lot of features and access that needs admin rights, login rights to be able to do anything. Otherwise, it's going to say you don't have access to do it. All right, this is your PowerShell version. Let's see, what is this for? No. I wanted to. Let's just do the. Yeah. Okay. All right. So what comes up on default is your little command window at the right side. This is a great way to start finding your commandlets to type in to search for something. Also, it shows your modules. These are all the modules that are loaded by default. And being an Amazon server, it has an AWS PowerShell module. So this lets you interface with the Amazon API in different methods. So that's how you can do that. All right, a couple of things I like to do up at the top. There are different views that you can set. The current default view is a split screen with your code at the top and the command prompts at the bottom. I kind of like to change it and put the code to the right and my command window on the left. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is go in here and open. I want to open up my scripts. My scripts are in a script folder. The very first script that needs to be run on each instance is this configure SQL Server. What this script will do, it has 3 parameters when you start it. It wants to know what the service account and service password is that SQL will be running under. That's the reason I had to parameterize that, is because depending on what environment that this server is going to run in, if it's in the test environment, we have a test service account, but if it's going to be in prod, it'll have a prod account. So those are going to be different, so they have to be passed as a parameter. And next is the DBA account. And as the DBA account, Mike Wyndham has set up a DBA group that we can use. So you put in that one group name in there and all the DBAs have access to it. Okay? So let's go through the code just a little bit. I don't want to bore you, and just let me know if it's going too slow for you. Okay. So let's go down here. Now this code is all version pre 1.0 because it's not quite ready for prime time, but it's very close. It does function most of the time. So what I do, I set some variables up there. Let's see, I even set a start date, so I can time how long this thing runs. At the end of the script, I have an end one that shows you how long in seconds and everything else to show you how long it took to run the script. Okay, other things this thing does, a push directory just saves your position when you're starting. We're telling it where to find things here. We're actually creating log files in case you need to look up some errors and see what's happening. Okay, variable declaration. In Amazon right now, I have set up an SA password as password123. And the reason I'm sharing that with everyone is the very last thing that we're going to do in our scripting is disable the SA account. We don't want to use SA account for part of our SQL hardening. So that's only used during the scripting part. Okay, the next thing is the TCP port. Right now we're using 1433, and that was due to SQL 2012 availability groups trying to connect to them through a different port became a problem, so we decided just to use the default port. Okay, next thing are folders. Whenever we install a new server, set up a new server, we just get an E drive. Let me open that up. Well, actually, let's see. This one hasn't had all the scripts run yet on it for the drive. So let me run these real quick. Okay, what we have to do is change the drives around. Instead of having D, E, and F and Z, right now Z is our ephemeral drive, and it's got the larger size. All the others are your small. Those are your backup ones. So we need to change that. So we're going to run this one script, and that's going to run this part and change around our drives for us. I believe this is going to be added to the CloudFormation process, so we won't have to manually do this the first time in the future. But it just takes it a few seconds to run. Okay, now it's done. So now we go back and look at our drives. We have a drive E that's 745 gig, and then the backup full, diff, and log are set up. They don't need drive letters. That's another change in the script we need to do to drop the drive letters, because those are actually mounted as subfolders. You see, it's created these folders for us, and here are 3 different backup volumes that are mounted as subfolders, just like we do in DC4. Okay, in the data, we don't have anything. Logs, we don't have anything. System, we don't have anything. And temp, we don't have anything. Okay, because those come in blank, we're going to have a script that creates our folders. Beneath temp, data, logs, and system, we have a log, jobs, data, and under we're going to create a restore 01 and a process folder. That's for the add tenant that Force has been working on. Alright, then we have a function, PowerShell function that's called create path. So down here we're going to be calling create path and passing the variables that have these folder names, and it's going to check them. If they don't exist, it'll create them for us. Okay, then we have a little import module that loads the SQL Server PowerShell module. We have another call here that is calling the physical memory to find out how much memory is on the server, and then it's going to set a variable to hold 75% of that and reserve that to configure SQL Server to use 75% of the physical memory. Other things that we have to do in this script are setting the security for the folders. Because the service account is not set as a local administrator on the box, we have to manually give it security for all of our subfolders. So that's what all these, all of these next section our calls are doing. Okay, below setting the security, we are going to change the SQL service account. Instead of running it under the local account, we're going to tell it to run under this service account and service password. We're doing the same thing for the agent and for the browser. So once we change them to run under a domain service account, then we will stop the services and then restart them. Okay. Next thing we have to do is rename the SQL instance, because this SQL instance was installed on a gold image of the server. It's going to have an Amazon name in it. So what it's going to do is say, now the current name of the computer, we're going to save that, and then the old name, we're going to have to go to SQL Server and select the old name and grab that. Okay, then we're going to drop the server for the old name, and then we're going to add a server for the new name. So now SQL Server knows it's running as the new name. Once we do that, we'll stop SQL. Okay, now we're going to start doing some tweaks. We're going to move the master database and the error log from the default C drive. We're going to go into the system registry, and we're going to change the SQL startup parameters to point to where these new ones are in System 01, and also put our trace flag that we have in our standard startup for SQL. So once they're physically moved and we've told the startup to use them, we'll restart SQL to use that. Okay, the next section of code is to set the SQL memory. So there is an SP configure that we can set. We're setting the min and the max to both be that 75% of max memory. So it's going to reserve that amount of memory and it's going to keep it there. Okay, so that's what that section's doing. Okay, the next thing that we do is set the location for the data and the logs and the backups. So we're setting the default location. Going into the system registry again, setting the default data and the default logs and the default backup folder. Okay, then this is the call to go into the registry to set the default port. So we're putting it at that value 1433, and that's what that is the default anyway, but that forces a fixed port, not the variable ports. Okay. Next, let's see, we move the MSDB database. So we are telling SQL before we move it that we're going to move it to the System 01 data folder and the Temp 01 data folder. Okay, and then we also modify the logging path for the SQL agent. And we're telling it to log that into the System 01 log folder, SQL out. After that, we go in to adding our new DBA account and our SQL Service account into the SQL servers, putting them in the admin role so they can do their normal work. Okay, then we're dropping the original old server / administrator name because that was left over. And let's see, that's what those two were doing. So once we get all that set up, we'll stop SQL Server again, and we'll move the model database and the error log. So you'll see the model, MSDB, and temp actually are being moved. Okay, once they're moved, we can start SQL again. And the very last part of it is loading scripts to create our standard DBA database and set up our backup full, backup diff, and backup log SQL jobs, along with our cleanup script and a sync backup volumes script. That's a new one for Amazon. What that is, when you have three servers running in 3 different AZs, only one is primary. We have a job set up now that Forrest wrote that will keep their backup volumes in sync, which is real nice. Okay, last thing we do, we turn on backup in compression, and then we just grab our end date and check the time, see how long it took to run all this. All right, so that's what the config SQL script does. That's quite a bit, but we'll go ahead and give it a run. So I'm just going to tell it to run. The very first thing it's going to do is ask me for a service account. The service account that we're using in the test environment is test/SQL test service. And then the password for that one, since it's just a test account, we'll put that in. And then for the DBA accounts, okay, that's the domain group that Mike Wyndham set up for the DBAs. So we'll put those parameters in and hopefully this thing will work. What it's doing now is setting up the folders and then setting the permissions. Let's see what goes on. Okay, so there's the folders that were created, the permissions that were going. Okay, waiting for the agent to stop. I did have a couple of 10-second sleeps in there, so that does incur a little delay in there, but that's just to make sure everything was running well before it continued. It should be almost done now. Okay, and it's done. It finished. So it says it took 7.64 seconds. That's not too bad to do all that configuring for SQL. Now let's go look at our SQL configuration. Let's refresh this. And now we can see the SQL service is running under that domain account. All three of them are. We're leaving the browser service stopped just for security purposes. We don't want people to browse around and just poke and see what SQL servers are running. So that's working. Now if we go over here and we go look at our System01 data folder, and all of a sudden we see here's all of our system databases running. And if we go to our log, here's our error logs already showing up, and we don't have anything in jobs yet. If we go look in our temp under data, here's our temp DB. Oh, and by the way, we also calculate how many temp files to create based on the number of CPUs in there. So we do have a few of those. All right, so everything is configured and running. So we should be able to start up SQL and take a quick peek. I'm going to minimize PowerShell for the moment. Do I have any questions about what this script does at this time? Okay, I'm going to log in as me, which is in the DBA domain group, and it lets me right in. So if we go look in security logins, there we are, and there's the service account that we have in there. If we go look at our databases, and we have our DBA database, we go look at our SQL jobs, and there's our backup jobs. That's all set up automatically. All right, I'm going to close that. Okay, next thing I wanted to show you back on the configuration manager, SQL 2012 has the high availability feature in it. So if we go look at the actual SQL service and look at that, you'll see an always on high availability tab. Right now it says Windows failover cluster name. It says this node is not in a failover cluster. So you have to turn on this checkbox that says enable always on availability groups. You have to enable it before you can use them, and to be able to enable it you have to have a cluster. So that's the next thing. Let's set up a cluster. Okay, if we look at our failover cluster manager real quick, we'll see that we do not have a cluster. If we try to connect to a cluster, browse, it says there's none around. Okay, so no clusters. So we're going to go back to PowerShell, and we'll open up a create cluster PowerShell script. Let me clear that screen. Okay, the next script is designed to create a cluster on the one machine that we're on, a cluster of one. Okay, it has a mandatory parameter of the cluster name. I do have a default in there, but that was just for testing. It's not used because you have to manually type one in. If you change mandatory to false, false, it would use that default value. Okay. So next thing we do, we're going to set up our logging again. We're setting up some variables. Our subnet mask is always going to be that. We have endpoints that will be used later on, and endpoint ports. First thing this thing does after setting all the variables is it has to find out what region this server is running in. It could be in US East, US West, or South America, or whatever. So that's going to be needed. Okay. We have a function that does the configuration of the failover cluster. There's a lot of stuff in that. It won't bore you with all the details of the PowerShell commands it needs to do it, but it's right there. We have another function of get IP address. In Amazon, IP addresses have to be reserved to the network interface of a server. They cannot float to other machines. Therefore, whenever we're setting up a cluster, we have to go make an API call to find out what our network ID is and then reserve a private IP address, register one to it. So we do that for each of the machines. Okay, so you get your functions defined. Then this is the main execution. You're going to go grab your start time again. You're going to go get your IP address, store it, and here it is. And then you're having to parse it out because that's going to return all the IP addresses for it. All right. Then it's going to call the failover, and then it's going to import the SQL PS module. Once we have the cluster set up, we're going to be able to go into the system and turn on that little checkbox I showed you a little while ago for the SQL high availability. So we're going to push in what the cluster name is and turn on that checkbox. That's what this code is doing in here. And the very last section is setting the owner of the IP address so it knows that this server owns that IP address. All right. There's several ways that you can run a PowerShell script. You can, from the ISE, you can just hit run, or you can go to the scripts folder and you can say / let's do create cluster and hit tab and it auto completes. And if you hit the minus, it's going to show you the parameter that's required. And it's going to say, what do you want this cluster name to be? Okay, I'm going to call this, just because this is a demo, July demo, CLUS. One thing you have to remember is a cluster name can only be no more than 15 characters. And that's a Windows limitation, nothing else. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So we're within the 15. Okay, so I'm going to hit enter, and hopefully everything will work on this and we'll get our cluster set up. Okay, it created a resource 1 for the IP address for this node in the cluster. Created the cluster name as a quorum type. Shows the resource 1 online pending. And it's done. So 3.5 seconds it created a cluster for us. Alright, so let's go look at the failover cluster manager now. And boom, there's our cluster. Okay, so we see that we do have a cluster. There's our cluster name we created, and there's the new IP address that got called from the Amazon API. Now, currently in Amazon, our failover cluster manager is a very tender, sensitive piece of software. I say that because you click on the wrong thing and it'll die on you. So really, for managing clusters, I recommend not even using the cluster manager except just to look at the basics and then use PowerShell to get your information. And I can have another session to explain how to do all that. But if I look at nodes, we can see that we have this one server in it. Okay. If we look at our cluster events, on startup it does give a few little odd errors, but that's normal. I'll just right click and reset recent events and clear those out for now. Okay. It says warning that we have a node majority on the cluster, but we only have one node, so it could fail if our node died, but that's fine. Close that. Okay, we now have a cluster of 1. Let's see, let's go back to our SQL configuration and let's look over here at our always on high availability. And you see it also filled in the cluster name and turned on the checkbox for us. So that's important. Alright, so now that we've configured SQL on this box, we have set up our cluster. Next thing we need to do is we'll open up add node to cluster. We want to add our second and third nodes in. Okay, our add node to cluster is going to just come up and ask you, what's your node name? And that's all it needs to know. Because we're running this from our main server from our pre-gold 01, we're going to tell it to add pre-gold 02 to our cluster. Okay, it's going to again figure out the region. It's going to look up the network ID for that old one for us. This one is the old version that has ping in it. We don't have our newest version there. I just noticed. I think that still functions, but we have a newer version of this script we need to find.
I think that will work okay.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. So this one's getting the IP address. It's reserving it for the new node that you add. And then it's adding the cluster resource and adding the node. At the end of the script, it's also going to fire up the SQL PS module so it can tell SQL Server on the new node that it is part of the cluster and to turn on its little checkbox. Okay. So let's run this one. And the node to add is pre-gold 02. Okay, this is our older version that had that unable to save property changes to resource. That's one that I think yesterday Forrest came out with a fix for this.
Yeah, the new version is in our gold folder now, or should be the wrapper script for that.
Let me see if I can pull that down while we're talking, waiting on that to wrap up. Okay. So let's go over here. This is I'm just looking, let's see. According to our little shared folder, it shows that one hadn't been updated since July 1. So maybe you can check on that for me. Okay, I'm going to stop this script. And I warned y'all that you're going to see some bloody errors at times, so that's what's happened. So let's see, what do I want to do? I'm going to pull up my little utility cluster commands. So let's clear our screen here and let's look at our cluster resources. Okay, we see resource 1 and resource 2. If we look at our cluster groups, we just have our cluster group. That's fine. If we look at our cluster nodes, we see node 2 has been added. What I want to do is remove this resource 2 and remove that one node real quick. So I have a line in my script here that will remove that one. And then let's see, remove. I have all sorts of little play stuff here. There it is right there. We can just go pre-gold 02. You get the cluster node and you tell it to remove it. So you do that. That's the same thing as evicting a node. So now whenever I look at resources, run that. Interesting. Let's go look at our cluster. Look at our nodes. Okay, we're just down to 1. Let's look at our IP addresses. We're just back to that. Okay. So let's try this add cluster one more time. Pre-gold 02. I knew it's having problems. Alrighty, so we'll have to work on that one a little bit more in the future. What I need to do is go into pre-gold 02. Now, one thing that I do is I have to manually install this SQL config. I have to run that manually on each server. So let's see if we can get that one configured. No, we're not going to install updates at this point. Let's check our drives. Okay, we need to run our CloudFormation scripts, storage. And while it's running, go to my PowerShell. Alrighty. So let's go over here, go to our C drive, to our scripts, config SQL Server, and run that. Service account. Password. DBA account. Forrest, which server did you do your tweaking on the add node to cluster yesterday? We can copy it off that.
Okay, I mean, you can get it out of the gold folder on the Google Drive, right?
Well, whenever I looked at there, the date on that one was old.
It's called add node to cluster wrapper is the name of that script.
Oh, wrapper. Okay, that's why it's a different name.
Yep, apologize.
Okay. Because I did update all my scripts, but that one must not have, I didn't know about that name. SQL is configuring on the second node. As soon as it's done, it is done. Let's go to our third node and get it configured. Oops, let's check the drives, make sure we have our drive set up. Yes, this one is set up. I did run that one. All right, we'll come over here. We'll run that one. We'll run that one. And we'll run that. Okay, while 3 is going, let's go back to 1. And let's open. Add node to cluster wrapper. That doesn't look like the whole thing there, Forrest. Okay, that's going to run it. Okay, I see what it's doing.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's just a little failsafe.
Yeah. All right, let's try to run him. Interesting. Is my cluster service not running?
Did we clean out the cluster after the failed attempt before?
I think we did, but our cluster service doesn't seem to be running. I was looking to see if I had the net start command in here that you had.
Yep.
Do you remember what the cluster service is?
Yeah, it's CLUS SVC.
Interesting. So our cluster has died. We can just remove the cluster and put it back. So I'll just use my remove cluster force command, and it says I can't do it because he's not there. Okay, the cluster service is running. Let's restart it. Well, I think our cluster is hosed on this machine. What do you think? All right. Well, to continue our demo, let's think of another cluster. Do you know of another cluster that we're running well on?
How are we looking on pre-gold 789?
No, we had an issue with that one yesterday.
Okay, well 10, 11, 12 should be fine.
Okay. Well, actually, let me go to 7 first and see. Okay, let's see. Yep, that one was having issues with availability groups.
Yep. I think that 10, 11, 12 will actually work great for us because we had gotten up to the point of getting all the nodes added like we've been trying to do here, so it's all ready to have the availability group created on it.
Okay. So pre-gold 10.
Mm-hmm.
It's not 10, it's O10. This one has SQL services not set up right. Do 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 do. Okay, let's tell it to start. There we go. All right. So that one, let's refresh. So we have 10, 11, 12. Okay, we don't have an availability group set up. Let's look at our databases. We have a DBA. Refresh that one. We don't have any. Refresh that. So we are good to create an AG. Cancel that. So let's look for create the AG. Okay, the availability group on these in SQL 2012 is what allows us the high availability. It'll set it up to have a database shared across multiple servers. So what this is going to be doing is, let's see, setting up some URL paths for the endpoints to use. And it's going to do the backups and everything else. Let's see if this will run. Let's run that. So our server is Paris Gold 010. The secondary server is Paris Gold 011. We'll give it an AG1 name. Okay, so it does a backup of a full backup and a transaction backup of the database that's going to be added to the group, and then it restores the full and the log and leaves it in restore only mode on the secondary server. That's what it's currently doing. And the last bit of code that looks like it may be hanging on is this SQL statement that will actually get the synchronizing working between the nodes. Yep, and it got a timeout.
It's possible that we may need to toggle the HADR on the SQL service.
On which nodes? All of them?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay. So we'll come over here. We'll turn it off. Apply. then turn it on. And it says you need to restart your service when you do that. Forrest, can you do that on 12? And I'll jump to 11 in a second.
Sure.
Just to save a little time. Okay, so 10 has it toggled. Put in my SQL, pin it, right click my SQL and pin it. Okay, just for everyone's understanding what we're doing, anytime you tear down a cluster, rebuild a cluster on our test servers, this little checkbox forgets what the cluster it is, so you have to actually manually go in there and turn it off and turn it back on for it to reread it. And that's what we were doing. Let me restart that. Okay, start the agent. Go back to 10. Okay, we'll give this one more try. Let's clear this out. Let's run this. Oops, before I do that, let's come over here. Okay, I've got to remove the AG1 that was created. There we go. We'll drop that database that it put over there. And he doesn't have it. Okay, so we're cleaned up. We're ready to go.
12 is ready to.
Okay. Does the backup, does the restore. And while it's restoring, okay, I will show you one that's functional now. Okay, on this one, we go look at everything going on. This is our People Answers SQL Prod server, and it's got the AG1 in it. If you right click on the AG1, it gives you an option to show dashboard. When you go look at the dashboard, it shows you that it's healthy. It shows you which one is primary and which servers are secondary. And then it also shows you that you can have up to 2 that have an automatic failover, and any one after that has to be a manual failover. We look down here at the databases. We see that our DBA database is currently synchronized, no data loss between server 1, 2, and 3. So that's always a good thing. This screen does have an auto refresh. It does have a way to fail over. If we want to fail our DBA database over, we can start the failover wizard. We'll click that. Okay, now it says where do you want to send it, to 2 or 3. Now over on the readiness, 2 says no data loss, 3 says no data loss but a warning. The warning is that it's in a manual, not a automatic, but we'll just pick node 2 and say do that. It says can you connect to it to prove who you are, and we'll say yeah, okay. Alright, and then we're going to say finish, and we'll look at more details. And what it's doing is setting the primary now as on node 2. So now if we refresh this screen, AG1, okay, we are actually connected to the listener, not directly to any specific server. And now it says AG1 is hosted by prod 2. Prod 2 is the primary, prod 1 is now secondary, and everything is still synchronized. The listener is the key to any application to use this high availability. And when you configure this, we have a script that creates the listener for you, and it reserves another IP address to attach to any of the 3 nodes, or all 3 nodes. So this is in a 34 subnet, a 35, and 36. And depending on which server it's running is which IP address is actually returned for the listener. So that's why whenever an application needs to talk to SQL through a HA group, it talks to the listener, and it needs a whatever that thing is, connection string. All right, so now that we can see, okay, we can see that we're all 3 connected and the listener's working. Do we have any questions?
Cliff, this is William. Hi.
Hey, William.
Hi. In your agenda, you're talking about set up the DTE. Did we miss that?
Sorry, talking about what?
TDE.
I need to look.
TDE.
Oh, TDE, Transparent Data Encryption. Turns out that script was not ready for demonstration at this time, so I'll have to do that another day.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Okay. One thing to show here is that on our servers, when you go look, you can see on prod 1, you see the DBA says synchronized. If I try to open it, it's going to say that it's inaccessible. Okay, we configured our availability group to not allow reading tables on a passive node. That is per Microsoft agreement. If you set it up to not allow any access to the databases on remote nodes, you don't have to pay a licensing fee for it. So we've chosen not to do that. Now on our primary node, and it says O2 is the primary, I can expand the DBA database and look at it. All right, so that's how that works. Any other questions?
So just kind of summarizing where we've been, Cliff, we've got,
yes,
we run the cloud formation script, we stand up a couple, 3 nodes there, we come back in, and right now we're coming back in and running Drive and SQL Server and cluster type batch files and PowerShell scripts.
Yes.
We're driving towards getting that glued together with Salt, right?
Yes.
How However, understanding the process, what's run in what order, I think is important for everybody to see. The second thing that's important is we don't have everything quite glued together with Salt yet. Depending on when people need to stand up these things, it is going to be this semi-manual process of running these scripts. And then as you see, we're still in development with some of this stuff. There's some problems, and having some familiarity with cleaning up, getting back, and trying again is I think, an important survival skill at this stage of the game.
Yes, it is. And I've started a document that explains the order and the parameters to pass of these scripts.
Oh, this is great. Yeah, good.
Okay, so the very first one is this config SQL Server, and it's telling you what the 3 parameters are. The next thing is the create cluster and the name it needs, and then the add node to cluster. And then the fourth will be a setup TDE, which sets up also the availability group. So once that's totally working without issues, then that'll be done. And then the last one is create listener script. So I've got this document. I did share this with Greg so he could start looking at it for setting up his Salt scripts for integrating with it. Okay, we have many other scripts that do a lot of other things that we're still working with. So let's see. Let's go back to pre-gold 1. Guess I lost my pre-gold 1. Let's go to 2. Okay, other scripts that we have. We can add a database to an AG. So if we have a new database coming online, we can add it to that. We add the node. So if a new node comes up, we can add it. We also add the node to the cluster. We have an add tenant. That's a new one that Forrest created. And attach a volume from a snapshot. Okay, we didn't really talk about snapshots of our backup volumes, but what we are doing on a full backup runs weekly, and after it completes the full backup, it takes a snapshot, and snapshot sends it over to S3 for archiving, and every week it'll take a snapshot, and it puts a tag in there for an expires date that I think Victor's going to create a script that will look for anything that expires today to delete the old snapshots so we can keep our 60 days worth of snapshots there. Let's see, we have creating clusters. There's our PowerShell scripts for creating our snapshots. When we can find our server IP address, we can force a server online. We can kill nodes. We can move our AG through PowerShell instead of using Windows. Tell it which one we want it to run in. And we have remove nodes, restore backups. Okay, we don't have a secret server anymore, so that template's not needed. And my TDE scripts I've been working on. So that's it for my demonstration. It's 9:45, so I'll give you all a few minutes before you have a 10 o'clock meeting if you like. But this thing has been recorded and should be